Dracula, die now and leave this world. You'll never belong here.
Oh, but this world invited me. Your own kind called me forth with praise and tribute.
Tribute? You're a thief. You steal men's souls, their freedom.
Freedom is always sacrificed to faith, good hunter. Or are you truly here by choice?
All I'm here for is you. To hell with your heresy! You're nothing but a blight on mankind.
Ha! Mankind! A cesspit of hatred and lies! Fight for them, then, and die for their sins!
Well, it's gonna be an interesting one. It amazes me how things can change with time. During the 90s, 2D side-scrolling game was basically what I played. Not because it was my preferred genre, but because most of the games of that time were like this. Games like Castlevania, Mega Man, Mario, Sonic were the mainstream during the 90s. To be honest, I was never good at this type of game, as I never had sufficient patience to play levels over and over again. When Castlevania Symphony of the Night was released back in '97, I was completely taken by the JRPG fever that came with the PS1 early years. I was so amazed with the games like Final Fantasy VII that I didn't have the wish to go back to what in my head was OG. To be honest, I knew that this game was a masterpiece. I had friends that played and loved the game, and it also scored high on magazine reviews. But I don't know, the simple fact of going back to 2D did not resonate with me back then. Since then, I have played other Castlevania games on Nintendo DS and PlayStation, and some years ago I even tried to revisit Symphony of the Night, but the emulator was not working the way I wished, so I decided to quit and leave the game for a while, but I knew that eventually I would go back and play it. 22 years later, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was released. The game was created by Koji Igarashi, the same mind behind Symphony of the Night, and it's considered to be its spiritual successor. I decided to order the game, but it wouldn't be fair to play Bloodstained without having played the original game, the game who inspired and defined the genre. So I started looking for options and decided to buy the Castlevania collection on PS4, which comes with Round of Blood and the Symphony of the Night. Although some dialogues were changed from the original English version, most of the reviews say that from a technical perspective, it is a solid port. So I made my decision. I bought the game and started playing it. And man, I'm glad I did it. After 22 years, I was finally ready to fully appreciate the game. And in the end, it turned to be one of my favorites of all time. The difference between Symphony of the Night and the previous Castlevania games is vast. For starters, the whip is gone. Alucard is visually a much more refined character compared to the previous vampire hunters from Belmont family. You no longer venture through levels until you face the final boss, but you have to explore a huge castle with lots of backtracking. And finally, your character levels up, and your weapons have stats just like in RPGs. Graphically, the Symphony of the Night is an evolution of previous Castlevanias. Nowadays, I'm able to appreciate much more than I did back then, and it's much because of the art. Technically, the game is nothing special, but the art is amazing, especially the scenarios and Alucard design, which is simple but very elegant. And you know, this was probably the reason why I pushed this game back in '97. Out of the box, it doesn't seem like a PlayStation 1 game, but a Super Nintendo game with a little bit enhanced graphics. I should have given it more time so I could be impressed by its art design. Symphony of the Night tells the story of Alucard, the Dracula's son, as he ventures into the Dark Lord Castle to destroy it. During his way, he will encounter Maria, who is looking for Richard Belmont, the protagonist of the previous game Round of Blood. She explains that Richard went into the castle, but he went missing. As the story progresses, you will learn that Richard is indeed in the castle and has proclaimed himself as the castle new lord. With Maria's assistance, Alucard faces Richard and discovers that the vampire hunter was in reality under a spell. After defeating the evil spirit that possessed him, Richard gets back to his senses, explains that the Dark Priest Shaft was the one who cast the spell, and also tells the priest is located in the center of the upside-down castle. Then, Alucard has to venture into the new castle to finally face Shaft. The new castle has its fair share of secrets and bosses. This is another point where this Castlevania really shines. The variety of bosses is immense, and the battles are usually great. When you finally encounter and face Shaft, you will learn his intentions when controlling Richard, as he wanted the hunters to fight and kill themselves. After defeating him, you will face the true boss of the game, Lord Dracula himself. The game tells a simple story, but is able to keep it interesting as it uses different elements to give you the details. Also, the story is heavily dependent on gameplay, so if you decide to rush your way through the end, you will surely lose important pieces and even get to the bad ending, where you get to kill Richard. I have really mixed feelings about this approach, as I love the way the game instigates you to discover every single detail, but on the other hand, it doesn't tell you anything. The most you get are sparse clues and really, everything you have to figure out by yourself, including how some items and gameplay work. It is a huge contrast from the games today that try to overflow you with tutorials and information, and I really appreciate it, but I feel that the game could have given a little more to explain its mechanics. To fully appreciate it, you will need time and to be curious to explore every single possibility. Just to exemplify, there are difficult bosses or situations that you can easily overcome if you know how to. In terms of gameplay, Symphony of the Night brings RPG elements to the well-known Castlevania formula. Nowadays it seems that all games try to incorporate RPG elements, but back then it was really innovative. As Alucard levels up, his stats improve, weapons and armor have different attributes, and some of them even improve as you play. Another innovation was the way that Alucard ventured through the castle. Here it becomes clear that Igarashi was heavily inspired by Metroid while creating this game. Instead of going through stages, in Symphony of the Night the goal is to explore all the rooms as you complete the castle map. Initially some areas won't be accessible, so you will need to obtain new powers and items to venture forth. Well, this is a game that requires a lot of backtracking. Fortunately, this is another area where Symphony of the Night really shines. The level design is simply amazing. The way that you explore the castle has a logic and you will never feel bored. The variety of relics, items and spells you obtain during the game opens different possibilities to explore the areas and face enemies. The save points are all well located and you'll never feel frustrated about losing a lot of progress if you eventually die. The game also uses teleport points that make it easier to go from one location to the another. This is a point where I feel that most of the new Metroidvania games fault, as it's very easy to become frustrated and stop playing, but Castlevania does it masterfully. As good as this game is, it's not perfect though. To use potions or items, you will need to equip it in one of your hands. It breaks a little the gameplay, as you will need to open the menu, select the item, use the item, then do the same process again to re-equip the weapon or shield. They should have made a different slot for items. It doesn't help either that the inventory gets very confusing as you accumulate a lot of items during the game. Another problem I found is that the spell commands are overly complicated. Sometimes it's very frustrating to try to execute the commands during battles as Alucard and the enemies are constantly changing direction. A shortcut button would have been very useful. None of these points, though, take away the shine of the gameplay, and it is important to put them in the context of the era the game was released. but I feel that at least the port could have improved them. The soundtrack is simply amazing. More than often you will feel very excited while you crush skeletons or feel very anxious venturing through the depths of the castle, and this is due to the insanely good and well-thought soundtrack. There are some amazing songs, such as Dracula's Castle or Tragic Prince, composed by Nishiro Yamane, that I could listen on and on. For sure, it's one of the greatest soundtracks of all games. As good as the sound is, I feel that some areas are way more inspired than the others. I know, it's hard to compose only masterpieces, but some tracks are so good that you expect the entire game to keep the same level. The voice acting is good for its time. There aren't a lot of dialogues, but they are all well executed. Not bright, but they work well. It is important to remember that most of the games of that time didn't have any dialogue. So to have something, and considering it's not trash, I think it's a good thing. The fact that I was able to enjoy this game so much after 22 years of its release is completely amazing. Although you can feel this is a game from the PS1 era, Symphony of the Night never feels old. In reality, it shines all the way through. It was one of the few games that I felt sad when I had to face the final boss, because I knew my journey was over, and I think that this is what defines a masterpiece.